Hello everyone, I'm Lou Zacharilla, a founder of the Intelligent Community Forum. Welcome to another episode of No Place But Home, our series that is taking place about communities during the COVID-19 crisis. We are seeking the views on what COVID-19 crisis leaders and people are doing to change the way they live, lead, or think about the places that we call home. Today is the second of a series of dialogues called The New Abnormal. As was stated in our first discussion last week, one of the outcomes of this pandemic is that we are all wary, or increasingly wary, of the public realm. Spatial distancing is the new normal. Urban designers, planners, and architects are all kind of scratching their heads about what to do next, but within those heads is a lot of thinking going on. While this is a crisis, it is also a chance, as our governor in New York has said, to reimagine. And this seems to be the mandate of the people that we're talking to in this series. So today, we've brought together two more thought leaders to help us look at the all-important topic of coexistence and what I call unsocial distancing. This series is supported by ICF Canada. It has been 127 days since the late Dr. Wenliang Li reported in his blog about a new pneumonia in the city of Wuhan, China. At the time, there were 80,000 reported cases. It has been 55 days since the World Health Organization declared this a global pandemic. There have been 257,906 deaths across the globe, 5,204 in the Netherlands, 182 in Morocco, 1,694 reported in India, 4,111 in Canada. The United States reports that there have been 72,417 deaths since 1330 today. We are recording this from New York. It is May 6th, 2020. It has been 70 days since New York State issued its order to close all non-essential facilities. Here, there have been 25,386 deaths as of yesterday. Here, the total daily number of coronavirus deaths was 230 on Monday, May 4th. That is actually a significant improvement. The number is under 300 again, 300 deaths for the fifth consecutive day. Okay. In a recent article in City Labs, Ian Klaus wrote, 19th century pandemics helped us usher in developments in water and sewage systems. But there can be no doubt that in the immediate future, the economic and demographic health of major cities is going to suffer enormously. But if we look forward optimistically, we must start by grappling with a difficult pattern. Urban history may be more about continuity through crises than about transformation. Well, this may or may not be true. One thing is for certain, we need to coexist in order to move forward. What does that mean? Well, today we're going to look at this topic in some detail. So to help us, we've asked Shyam Khandekar, an urban planner, an urban designer, and architect, who is the co-founder and director of My Liveable City and the My Liveable City Academy in the Netherlands and India. He is also the co-author of a recent book on affordable housing and inclusive cities. Shyam, welcome. Also with us today is Dr. Hassan Radoine. He is the professor and director of the School of Architecture, Planning and Design at Mohammed VI Polytechnic University in Morocco. And I'm delighted to have my friend join us from Morocco today. Welcome, Dr. Radoine. Hassan. Also with me is my friend and colleague here at ICF, John G. Jung. John is the chairman and co-founder of the Intelligent Community Forum and founded our ICF Canada organization. He is also an urban planner, urban designer, economic developer, and today he joins us from Toronto, Canada. Welcome, John.
Excellent.
I'm going to turn it over to you and help us explain what we want to get through over the next 50 minutes and tee us off.
Great. Well, thank you, Lou, and look forward to this conversation with Hassan and Shyam. When we are talking about spatial distancing and a new look at density and a variety of other things, urban planners, urban designers, and architects are, as you said earlier, scratching their heads to try and figure out what the new, as you call it, abnormal is going to be. And I think that it's a really important topic to think about this concept of coexistence in a variety of different forms, not just in the physical sense, but in terms of social behavior. Opportunities for us to maybe rethink and reimagine how our communities might evolve post-pandemic. We obviously have issues currently while we're going through this, while we're being rescued and trying to find the resources to continue on. But this series is about looking forward and talking to thought leaders globally about how we might reimagine moving forward. And I think that Shyam and Hassan will give us a different perspective. Last week, we talked to North Americans. Now we're going to be talking with people in totally different parts of the world and from a different cultural perspective. So Shyam and Hassan, we're going to ask you a number of different questions related to how things are going today in the places you live in Morocco and in the Netherlands, but also in India, Shyam, because you're in both places. But also we'll reflect on what's going on here in North America and have that comparison. So Lou, I'm going to pass it back to you and generate the first question, and we'll have a conversation as we move forward.
Thanks, John. Much appreciated. Before I ask, well, I'm going to ask the first question, but first, Shyam, where are you today, and what is the actual situation where you're located?
I'm in Netherlands because that is actually my place of residence. I travel very extensively to India and work there too. And I'm originally from India, but for the last 40 years I've been in Netherlands. So I'm here with my family. And the situation is actually that the peak of the pandemic, deaths, etc., is behind us. In fact, just before this session started, half an hour before this, the Prime Minister had come on the television in a national speech in which he told how we are going to exit from the lockdown situation in steps. So the schools many things are going to start from the 11th of May, and then onwards every week more things will start. The lockdown here has not been as oppressive as in some other countries. They have called it, you might like that word, intelligent lockdown. That's the word they have tried to use. Okay, so as ICF, you probably appreciate that word. So they have called it an intelligent lockdown, and we have actually been allowed to go out and go to the public spaces and go to the parks and go to beaches as long as we kept our distance, social distance. Okay, and we could go to the shops which are open. Not all shops are open, but whatever is open, we are allowed to do. That's the situation now. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, clearly in our case. Yeah.
Well, very good. That is promising. That is different than what we've experienced here. We say that there is tunnel at the end of the light. Well, thank you for that. Hassan, I know you're in Morocco, but where in Morocco, and what is your situation in that beautiful country?
Yeah, thanks, Lou. I'm always delighted and honored to be in your panels, and it's quite interesting that Intelligent Community Forum is always bringing updated topics, and of course, you're always abreast with any new issues happening on the ground. I think the situation here, if we're dealing, of course, with intelligent communities, since we are in a forum regarding that, I think in Morocco, I'm not praising Morocco or throwing flowers to Morocco, but I think there was like a bold decision from the top management since day one, before the pandemic actually started, devastating everything. I think we succeeded in limiting the damage more than to close the frontiers at the right time, And the second thing, based on that top management decision, I think was something communal at the level of the country to create a fund, that all rich people in Morocco would contribute, including middle income people. And then we created this very important financing to meet this challenge in Morocco. And it's actually working well. If we just wait for the government to decide, like what happened to Italy and other European countries, and then they got very late responses. So therefore, I think in that strategic level, I think the things, they were well planned. However, I would underline culturally what was good to combat this pandemic in a very right time. Since we are family oriented and we are community oriented, so we are naturally, culturally organized around family clusters, and we are organized around community neighborhoods clusters. So when the things happen, the community was already, they know each other. They were very connected. So therefore there is a sense of consciousness how to deal with this situation in the right way. So therefore it's not just thinking about yourself as an individual, but rather family clusters, community clusters, and city clusters. They are working well to harmonize how this pandemic actually is spreading, because it's, you know, more than me, following the statistics who are contaminated, the more you know who is contaminated home, and this kind of spread of the pandemic, then you can control its actually manifestation and its contamination more. So I think you can read all over the news that I think Morocco in the whole continent of Africa is managing and doing well so far, what I can see. And there is also rebuilding trust between the local management of community and the top management. This is for the first time we see that this pandemic actually is bridging the gap between the two levels, the macro and the micro level, in terms of community and government.
Very good. Well, I want to circle back on some of those issues that you brought up, because it's the third time we've heard about how cultures that are more family structured have been successful at managing the crisis. So maybe that's something we can explore when we get to talking about culture. Thank you for that, Hassan. John, what's going on in Toronto today?
Right. So we just heard that obviously we're about to reopen stores and parks and so forth, but there's a caution. There are people thinking that it's probably too soon. And so on one hand, there's a great desire to go out and be part of the beautiful weather. On the other hand, there are still, as in New York, a great number of cases and deaths on a per capita basis. And so people are very cautious, notwithstanding the other aspects of government want the economy to come back. So these are all topics that are of concern to people who are in the decision-making space, but also to families, people who are taking it upon themselves to say, hell, I'm not going to allow my kids to go to school if it opens. We're going to take destiny in our own hands here, not just because government wants us to go back and open things up for the economy or for political gain, as you might have in the United States. So that's what's happening in Toronto and in Canada.
Yeah.
By the way, I heard your governor speak about the evolution of opening, and it was more of a question of how do you open as opposed to when you open. I thought that was pretty good.
You're talking about our governor in New York, Mr. Andrew Cuomo, yeah. And you know, your point is that nothing will happen if there isn't trust, whether it's a governmental trust or whether it's cultural trust or whatever. One thing we are saying, of course, in New York and the United States is that we do need a vaccine to be completely trustful of the ability to go back into society, irrespective of how society will look then. And we just got a report this morning that our own New York University is actually testing a new messenger RNA platform vaccine. The trial is underway on humans, which is a very, very rapid testing of a vaccine. This is a very short period of time. That platform has never before been tried on humans, but they're very encouraged by what they're seeing. That is the RNA platform that Bill Gates and others have been talking about. So, you know, until we get a vaccine, of course, we're not completely out of the woods on this. But that is a report, John, to pick up on your point. Well, let's move now to another important element, which is coexistence. The first question, the first topic I wanted to address was how will we physically and creatively coexist post this pandemic? Do we think that Shyam, do you think that your current experience will change the way you look at how you're going to teach, publish, plan, design, and think about communities?
Surely. I think every experience enriches you, enriches one. So this one will too. However, I think it was about more than a month back or 5 weeks back when I wrote an email to about 100 people who actually work with My Liveable City and do different things for My Liveable City, trying to put this pandemic, I didn't know where it was going, but to try to put it in context and compare it with other things which are happening. So saying, unless we compare it to other things, we will never, that's the only way you can know how to go forward. Okay, so what I was trying to say there was also that I said that, listen, whenever such things happen, the tendency of the governments very often after that, I mean, we're talking about urban design and planning, we're coming to that topic, right?
Yes.
So the tendency is very often to come down to regulations. So let's say there's a disaster with water, so you try to make dikes or levees, what I think you call it in America. If there's something else with fire, you try to do you have to make sure that fire engines can be there. Sometimes, however, what happens is that the immediate response is such that it destroys many other values which have been built over decades, if not centuries. I'll give you an example from India. For example, because of fire regulations, which came in because there were fires in a couple of buildings, the fire regulations in India are such that when you build a building of any size from 6 stories upwards or 10 stories upwards, you have to build a road around it for the fire brigade to access it. This seems sensible purely from the fire point of view, but what it does is basically, it also means that if it's a residential tower, a child walking out of the building has to cross a road always to reach a green space. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is very often when you look at only this pandemic on itself, you might come to regulations and suggestions which might seem sensible in the context of this pandemic, but might destroy many values which have been in our civic life in our city. Okay?
Yes.
And I'm going to just, if you allow me, I'll just carry on a little and just elaborate this a little further. Is that okay, Lou?
Sure. So what you're talking about, though, are the unintended consequences of just reacting to the pandemic itself and not thinking more holistically. Have I got that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's right. So my point is, actually, we all know that COVID has a big city bias. You know, it is mostly, these are the bigger cities and urban settlements which have got more of these cases. Relatively, in smaller settlements, rural areas, it has been the numbers have been less and the problems have been less. Now, cities grew and prospered over centuries because there was a value in people coming there. There was economical issues, but also people meeting each other. In fact, the interesting thing is, because of this lockdown which has happened, when people now go out on the street and they just meet their neighbors on the street, they're extremely happy and they're so delighted to meet them, simply because they say, oh my God, I can see. So these are the values for which cities have been known, and that's why people come there and meet there. So I don't think we should be doing anything which will destroy those values, whatever the result of these pandemics. And I want to put the context. You just now said that the number of people who died to date was 257,000 people. Okay, right?
Right.
That is the number you quoted just now.
Globally, yeah.
But do you know globally in urban mobility, more than 1 million people die every year year in, year out, every year. India loses 150,000 people every year. And the fatalities are much more in the emerging countries because the infrastructure is not there. Okay, so I want to put the problem of this thing. So what I'm trying to say is, let's not do something in haste, and still we have to do certain things. So the most important thing to me is that the public domain, the public space where people meet and feel the joy of being in the city, we need to concentrate on that and not say that that's the danger zone, but actually expand it and make it bigger so that people can actually interact there in a better way. Because at this moment, in places like India, the larger cities, the amount of public space is negligible. There are hardly any footpaths. Everything has been given to cars or to private property. So that is one thing. And the other thing is that if we have larger spaces, public spaces, I mean, it can answer another issue, like letting people come out and do exercise. In India, people are not able to do that because they're not allowed, because there's hardly any public space. Okay. So the lockdown.
So Shyam, just because you're bringing up a real intriguing point. If I'm hearing you properly, it's a sort of a unique point of view, which is, as we get through this and we talk about coexistence, one of the outcomes should be that we're talking more about public space, not restricting space or creating more social distance. Am I reading you right?
I think the social distance will happen if the amount of public space is more. See, what some cities are doing is they are giving, at this moment, they're taking temporary measures and giving some space reserved for cars to pedestrians so that people can walk on the pavements, or cyclists can use that so that the distance can be kept.
Yeah.
Okay. But this is not possible in cities where the public space are very small. Okay. So I think the public space is an important thing that has made our cities, given them the vitality and the reason for people to be there. And there is no reason we should be questioning that. The question can only be, are they large enough? Should we not be making more of it? Okay.
Right.
So social distance can be kept.
Fair enough.
Maybe that will also allow people to do exercise. I mean, you know, I'm going back between India and Netherlands, so I'll keep on in discussions bringing both the countries. In Netherlands, people have the luxury of having houses which are reasonably large and convenient. So if you look behind me, I have a rowing machine and I can sort of do my rowing in my, and a cycling thing. I can do it in here if I want. In India, and we are later on, you know, if you talk of the migrants within India, there's 60 million migrants in India, within India itself, 60 million. These guys share a single room. For them, public space is much more important than for people in countries like in Netherlands. So if they want to do exercise, the only place they can do it is in public space.
Got it. Let's stop there. That's a very good point, because our next topic is actually talking about the essential workforce, the public workers, who I believe we're going to have to rethink life for, because they've been our heroes. At least they have in New York. Hassan, let's move over to you on that one. The idea of public space, the idea of public gatherings. Of course, I remember when you showed me around Casablanca last year. We stopped at cafes and we made friends right away. I mean, the idea of that public space being used to just be with each other was a profound experience for me. It was a very joyful human experience. Are you, though, looking are you rethinking any of that in the light of this crisis, or are you sort of coming down where Shyam is coming down and saying, yeah, we probably need even more public space?
Yeah, I think we need to be very careful, because this is not the first time that the pandemic has happened in the human history. We had before, cities that went through flooding, they went through famines, there were a lot of pandemics before. I think we should not be very pessimist. I think this is the human change. And I think what concerns me is not what's happening, but actually how our planning is actually performing in terms of responsiveness. This is the most important thing, not only public spaces. What about public amenities and services, public spaces, business-oriented stuff, like we have souks and we have people gathering in one area and they are really numerous, and So it's not just, and the other thing, we need to demystify what is a public space. Public space is just a space where people, they gather and they get out of their private zone. So therefore, we need to have always a hierarchy about the different spaces of private, semi-private or semi-public, and then full public. I think this kind of transition, which was not planned in modern cities, yet modern cities and modernist cities, they were actually planned because of hygiene, because of a lot of issues in European cities and stuff. The modernists, they came, no, we don't want this dense fabric of old towns in Europe. Let's actually, like Cerda in Barcelona, let's actually, open up those cities and make them very orthogonal to control things. And I am quite dazzled now that we are complaining about what we did to respond to pandemics in the 19th century. So that was our planning processes that failed. So this is why I agree with you. We need to deal with more with unintended consequences. Yes. How smart we plan. And the other thing, the things that I've been teaching in my school and I've been advocating myself for the last 15 years, though my colleagues, planners and architects, they were saying what this guy is talking about. I was saying, before you talk about sustainability, you need to talk about resilience. What is resilience? Resilience, when you get this sustainable space, sustainable city, sustainable neighborhood, it needs to have a certain layer of resilience. What is resilience? That means you can actually respond in the right time, and it is intrinsic within the planning process. It's not you make me fancy public space with a statue in the middle, and then you make a couple of glass for business, and then you tell me this is a public space. This is also questioning the consumerism. Is public spaces, they were actually designed for people or designed for other gadgets or objects to be displayed? So therefore, in this case, I am very optimistic that this pandemic that will not last, and we need to think about this temporality of the problem. Are we talking this pandemic will last 10 years? Then let's talk about the planning and shift the paradigm of planning and think about things like in the cosmos or in the surface of Mars. And we need to put like bubble glasses where to hide people. So this is actually two fantasies now. So let's wait and see when this problem will be solved with a vaccine. I think we need to question now responsiveness of cities, adaptation of users to the situation, these adaptations of users to the situation, and how they are conscious about using that space. Even you get a new iPad, you need to read the guidelines to use it. So whatever we do, we need to do it with bottom up with users. And I think they adapt very quickly. Just for information, to be more optimistic, I think now public spaces in Morocco, they are changing their metaphor and they are changing their morphology because of the pandemics. There are always some new good things coming out showing the resilience. And we should not be two planners in our heads. I mean, that top planning, me as a one planner, I get the plan, I will draw for you the city. Let's talk, this is how the public space, I don't think it will work like that. Let's actually watch and observe how communities are intelligent enough to deal with this situation, to create adequate spaces in the middle of crisis. And those niches of solutions brought by the community, they will be the future of the planet.
So let's use human intelligence to create our own resilience because we've been doing it for centuries. Is that a summary? Okay, very good. John, you've been listening. More public spaces, rethinking public spaces, beware of unintended consequences of acting too quickly. Hassan is talking about a more organic form of resilience. Let's observe how our cities are behaving, how they're evolving. I think he was kind of joking when he said this thing's going to go on for 10 years, we're going to build a bubble. I don't think he believes that, but he's talking about resilience and the different shapes, and he referred to the metaphor of humanity living side by side. What's your takeaway about the response to public space now and unintended consequences? Because we in the West, and certainly in the United States, we tend to react very quickly. My wife happens to be Korean, and she said, "Wow, the United States, they all they needed was a fly swatter against this cockroach, but they used a bomb. Maybe we react too quickly here. What do you think?"
Well, a couple of things are happening, and I think it's very good that we're going through this in one respect, not because of the deaths, but obviously there are some positive things that come from this. There are certain learnings that come as a result of an experience that people are put through. A couple of things that come to mind immediately is people everywhere. I see people in images from New York City. Streets are closed. People are cycling on it and walking on it. Here in Toronto, the same sort of thing. Recognition that many of the streets that people were driving their cars on are now, being taken over either in part because they're being separated from the movement of mobility that might pass by, and that they can be more leisurely on that in that space. But I also see that people don't quite yet understand that people use these public spaces not only for exercise but for humanity, for getting together, for bringing families together and so forth. And unfortunately, in some of our cities, the beaches, the parks, and so forth are closed. And so people are being forced into some of these smaller spaces, whether they're on streets or in smaller parks that don't have the police tape across them. So there is a philosophy of, that more public space, larger public space can be made available, should be made available. And this way, if we have to spatially distance ourselves, then we have the ability to do so in those larger public spaces. I think, as Shyam said, here's an opportunity for us now to reimagine what is more important. So from a human-centric perspective, if we, as Hassan said, look from the bottom up and not just take a design that somebody has just come up with and forced on us, people will respond and identify what is important for them. And I think that the processes we're beginning to see that are more important are those that we refer to here as, we're going through a training session around ethical smart cities. And the idea is to create a human-centric approach that looks at, and it's sort of an open city and transparent and diverse city aspect to it. Getting all the people together who actually will be using that space and providing their input. We have a big project here. It's not that big, but it's obviously big in the global sense, called Sidewalk Labs in Toronto. And people are talking about what's important in that space. A lot of it is about things like affordable housing and data governance and so forth, but also about the space itself and how large it should be, how accessible it should be along the waterfront, and all those kinds of questions. I think that we are now seeing an emergence of greater public civic engagement in the discussion of urban design than we've ever had in the past. And I think that's not only in Western societies like in Toronto or in New York, but we're going to see that all around the world, where people are going to be more part of the discussion. A human-centric approach is becoming more common as we move forward. And I think this is the exclamation mark that allows people to say, we want this in our communities as a result of the experience we just went through.
Shyam, how much of what John is talking about is being driven by the simple economics and changes in the workforce as well as trusts that people have or don't have in their democracies? We're talking here in New York now about office buildings, probably not being built in the numbers that they've been built over time because more people are working at home. More people are now knowledge workers. They're working with information and intelligence. We're talking about creativity now as one of the most important management characteristics or characteristics in any job. How much of that is going to influence this this notion of humanizing our public spaces and our thinking about design?
Let me start with actually this one incident. Just about 2 weeks back, I got my first design assignment, which is related to this pandemic. And this is the only one which I got, and it's a small thing. And I'll tell you, and this shows how people are reacting. This is a case in India. In India, which I was explaining, that the amount of public space in big cities is very limited. If you think New York has limited public space, Mumbai has about 1/10 of public space per person, 1/10 of that. Okay, so I'm talking in that context when I'm talking about problems of countries like India. So while the residences they have are much smaller, okay, and devoid of any comfort. Okay, so this is a project which I have been working on for the last 10 years. It's a 10-hectare site. So if you're in acres, it's 25 acres, and it's a high density place, and it's an IT campus. So a lot of these people, banks, etc., are placed in it, and 35,000 people are working there because the density of building is high. But while in North America, you calculate one person per 25 square meters, at least in Netherlands, we say for 25 meters of space, there's one person working. In India, in these call centers, it's about 8. So it's about 3 times as much. So if your building density is twice as high and the person density is 3 times as much, you get a density of person about 6 times as high in that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this campus has been very successful because I designed it with a large park and everything is around the park, and every building somehow manages to get out, people can get out onto the central space. But now it's locked down, and the government is not letting anybody work there. The government has now said a couple of weeks back that we are going to allow you to do it in steps. So initially about 1/3 of the number of people will be allowed to come in. So my client called me and he said, Shyam, we have a problem because this is a massive project, and this is related to this thing about working from home, etc. Because it's a massive project, he said, the moment they find 1 or 2 people infected, they will close down the whole campus again. So my solution to him was, because I had done the master plan itself, I said, listen, we have done the master plan in such a way that we can compartmentalize it into 4 mini campuses where 4 streams of people can come in from different directions, particularly with 1/3 of the people working there. The traffic intensity will be much less and can be done quite easily. Okay, now I think that this is an approach which some companies are going to take in future, as far as I know. That what they are going to try to do is, in design terms, they're going to say to me as a designer, that listen, you can do what you want, but I also want to have a scenario where it is possible to split it in smaller units somehow, in one way or the other. And I think that is also a way forward for the cities themselves, personally, because I think where we have gone wrong really is with the size of our cities, and particularly in the developing world, where there are 15 million and 20 million, which is ridiculous,
I think so.
Ridiculous, yeah. Because in terms of landscape and ecology, that landscape cannot sustain cities of that size. So there has to be, so to me, the big thing actually of this whole thing, and it has always been there a little bit, but I think now is, if there's a proof necessary, is to actually compartmentalize, reduce sizes in the sense that there has to be a manageable size. The largest farming unit here, I don't know what is the English word for it, where you raise pigs. It has 30,000 pigs, and it has more than 1 million chicks. That is right. The size. I mean, it's gone. Our cities and everything we do because of economic logic has gone totally out of scale. And we have to ask ourselves moral and ethical questions about whether that's the right way to go. And I don't think that's the right way.
Well, let me ask you this. Just take the project that you've been given and the philosophy or the idea that you just outlined and apply it to a city. Of course, we know now that the Japanese are working on distributed power grids, where, you know, if there's a blackout,
Yes.
well, it would only happen in one neighborhood. It wouldn't happen citywide, as we've experienced in my city several times. What would be the first step with regard to sort of separating cities so that they don't seem so overwhelmed? How would you distribute them? Is there a way to retrofit them, I guess I'm asking, in the short term?
Yeah, I guess you will be able to. So one of the things will be is that in many of our, in many countries, the zoning plans have gone and to zone different functions in different parts of the city has gone too far. Okay, in the sense that you have certain area, there's a district where people work, and there's another district where people live, right? And this works with head office of a company which wants to be a large one. You know, the largest client in this this campus I'm talking about, I don't want to mention the name of the bank, but they have actually, the largest unit which they have taken has got 1 million square feet, which is 100,000 square meters of space. So just divide it by, you know, 8 and you get the number of people who will be working there. Now, these people, I think going forward might think twice in having something like this, because putting all the eggs in one basket and then, you know, having problem with it. They might want to compartmentalize their operations. So if you have neighborhoods where you could have living and working spaces, and which are walking neighborhoods then, you know, 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, 1 kilometer by 2 kilometers, you know, that sort of thing. So I think we need to think, and in the developing world, actually, in India, about half of the housing and office stock is still going to be built in the next 20, 30 years. So, you know, in the Western world, in Netherlands, we are not building so much new outside, but in the emerging world, about half, or more than half actually, of the housing stock is still going to be built.
Right, he's got a chance to do it right.
Yeah.
Hassan, is that a familiar issue that Shyam's describing in Morocco, or are there other issues that you need to think about culturally to accommodate the new workforce? Or, you know, Morocco being an agricultural nation, do you need to think differently about that sector of the economy?
Yeah, I think, Lo, I would start by the thing that I am going through every day since I'm the dean of a school, and of course, dealing with the campus. And I think Shyam, I think, mentioned the question of the campus, and I think the campus is quintessential example. Why? Because you have a community within the confines of a university, of a campus, and how to deal with it. I think this is the perfect miniature example for how to handle a city.
Right.
And it's one. He's brought it up, and this is why I would bring the experience of Mohammed VI Polytechnic University. I think we were quite not actually prepared, but since we were actually basing this new campus on digital infrastructure, and we were always claiming innovation, and what's in the future. And we are in a territory that you visited, the Rahamna, which is in the vicinity of Marrakesh, which is the big city, and we are a campus in a territory. I think this is why the notion of planning, not cities, but planning territories with S, the notion of the city is no longer, because the territory and how you optimize the use of resources and how you optimize the performance of the territory, be it in a safe time or be it in an unsafe time. So this is one. The second thing that actually we experience in our campus is just quite amazing. When we were living in that campus every single day, we have a mental construct based on this physical anchorage within the campus. When we move to virtual reality, that campus is still there in our mind. So therefore, there is actually quite an amazing opportunity of bounding people, making them closer via virtual reality. And this is, for me, what it's the new augmented reality. Augmented reality, how to boost the human experience for a physical setting that will not be stopped, but we are still working. This was not in the history, but this is thanks to technology, we're moving towards that. So therefore, we should not undermine that we are moving to Industry 4.0. That means communication, ICTs, and how to perform, and those communities, they would be closer. I assure you, not just having a plaza and people around it, rich and poor. You may have more discrimination in a physical plaza than a virtual reality to give you time more to explain where you are. So therefore, I think we need to think and grasp this opportunity. Like for our university just had a wonderful interview with 30 students yesterday, a class that I was used to teach in front of me. And they, all of them in those small screens in the computer, and all of them, let's listen to the voice of the new generation. Sir, we are learning more because professors, they send materials beforehand. We are exchanging messages more. So there is more opportunity now to exchange through that. So therefore, there are two constructs: mental construct, physical construct. And the notion not of the city has territories. And therefore, even if we think to plan to close people in clusters to protect them, this is another problem of planning. Because of hygiene, we created regulations. Because of regulations, become technocratic. And then we are dictating the rule, and then the community has no voice. Now, with this, actually community is getting back its voice and saying, oh, what we need to do to work without the physical city. So therefore, I think in the case of Morocco, I think that is very sure. It's how now to rethink planning based on ACTs and communication, and how we need to advance that to get the right of being connected to everyone. I think it's so important. If we talk about this democratic system that was more physical, but now it's more soft than hard. So therefore, the challenge that we have in the developing countries, that a large number of people, they may not be connected like you and me. Now you are in the US and I'm in Morocco, and look, it's just like you are like next to me. So therefore, the challenge now in terms of democratic rights globally, and therefore this is the right globalization, not the negative one, or the globalization of consumerism, but the globalization of being together to face different things and being in one global village. We were talking about the global village. Here we are in the global village. Because of the pandemic, we become all of us united. France, Italy, Germany, Chad, Mali, Morocco, Australia, and they think for the first time we're watching the global village working well. In terms of planning processes of cities, I think cities, they need to work more on the private, to be honest with you, not the public. Imagine a household with 6 kids and the mother and the father sharing 80 square meters. This is what concerns me. It's not about the plaza for the public space where to enjoy coffee while you have 8 people sharing 50 square meters. So therefore, the private zone is also a public zone. And this is what was in history. I mean, houses, when you get in and you close the door, it just, you are in a realm of your own. This is why people, they cannot stand confinement. Look at Europe, because they are just eating in outside restaurants. They don't have even a kitchen inside. Sir, now you need to have a kitchen inside. And this is resilience. And they think these patterns of use of spaces, territories, it needs to be rethought in order to create a new social order, not orthogonal physical order of aesthetics, but rather users' realms that they should be crystallized in the planning processes to create life and to create experience. Whatever we will face in the future, we need to be ready. That's it.
Wow, very good, John. That opens up a whole vista of ideas about the intelligent community. I mean, where Hassan is going there is, I mean, McLuhan was talking about the global village many, many, many years ago, but I think, I just heard somebody giving it shape and adding the concept of the things that you and I talk about at ICF all the time, which is this connectivity technology, actually being a part now of the community and giving people this technological and physical coexistence, so that we can redefine city into territory, and we can redefine territory into communicating across the world. And again, it sounds like a whole new expression for the community, for the political structure, and for how we live inside our homes and
but
public
Lou,
spaces. A lot going on there.
Lou, as you know, urban areas tend to have that capability, but a lot of rural areas don't. They don't have that connectivity. They don't necessarily have the ability to connect in the same way. They have different ways of connecting. You know, they're maybe socially engaging differently and maybe in some cases better. But you know what I want to come to, and before we end this discussion, is this whole idea that what this pandemic has given us the opportunity to experience is the fact that in our urban centers and even in our rural centers, we are now able to take a look at this in the form of a city lab. We can experiment with things. We can now think about things that we weren't able to think about before, or even begin to get anybody's attention around. Now we can get the attention of the decision makers, the mayors, the governors, maybe even presidents, to rethink or begin to have that conversation. I like the idea of taking these experiences and creating city laboratories everywhere in the world based on the values that they have, and to experience and to take it further to that next level, so that the things that Shyam is talking about, you know, redistributing activities and people in different parts of the city, so that in the event something happens in one part, at least you have something else happening in another part, where you can begin to reimagine the things that Hassan is talking about, and actually see if you can make those things happen. I like that aspect of it in a positive sense, not always looking at this pandemic in a negative sense. And I'd really like to hear what Hassan and Shyam think in terms of this idea of taking the next little while and giving the opportunity of communities to act as city labs, to kind of learn from this experience and begin to evolve it into a positive approach to the redesign and thinking of the city.
Well, let's make that the final question then, John. It's going to have to be a short answer, Shyam and Hassan, but let's take John's idea of the city laboratory concept, but let's get it a little bit more specific, because we're getting asked a lot, Shyam, about how healthcare policy now will fit into the new design. Can you sort of merge those two issues? City as laboratory, but with the perspective now of accommodating healthcare and healthcare policy?
I think.
And can you do it in 30 seconds? Yeah.
Yes. I think as far as this pandemic is concerned, I think we only have to think of temporary measures, because I don't believe that this pandemic should be the reason for us to redesign the cities. Simple. I do think that it gives an opportunity. John is absolutely right that the eyes of mayors and presidents and everybody is focused if you come with ideas for cities, right? So in that way, the fact that it is city bias, this pandemic helps in getting that attention. But I'm quite optimistic that we'll have a vaccination or something, and after some time, everybody will be, particularly the individuals, will be going back to their normal way of life. I think after the floods happened in Netherlands, more people didn't learn swimming. Okay, so I don't think people are going to change their lifestyles. I think companies will. That's the difference. And that's what is going to make a difference.
Okay, so once the vaccine comes out, things don't change that much, nor necessarily should they, in terms of design. Hassan, do you want to pick up on that question as well, in terms of the city laboratories and the healthcare item?
I think the city laboratory, I think, Lou, when you visited Mohammed VI University, we are actually in a new planned green city, okay? And we were thinking about that the city is under construction, by the way, from scratch. And then you have the campus in the middle of that new city. And what we were calling it is the experimentation lab. I'm so happy that you are bringing up this point. I think with John as well, I thank you for saying that city lab. I think we should not follow technocratic planning and we say we have a solution for every problem and remedies through regulations. I think experimentation, city as a field of experimentation, where users are adopting solutions, and there is feedback for systems to perform within the city. And this is why I am, before the pandemic, I think in the school where I am now, we have the whole city as laboratory. And we are actually experiencing things, and we're going to the old sounds like Medinas and say what works in them, what did not work, how the contemporary planning is working. So it's actually the right time to do retrospective analysis of all our practices of planning in order to project new paths for planning based on a lot of new ideas. Of course, the SDGs, with the United Nations SDGs, they are bringing lots of sustainability goals, but those sustainability goals with the pandemics now, I think they are urgent to implement some of them, like in the case of UN Habitat that I am dealing with. I think I will put just a couple of points. One, we were thinking about sustainability, that the cities, they are spreading too much. Thanks to the pandemic, people are more conscious to live now in rural areas, not in the cities. Thanks to communication, people, they will not anymore just buy their apartment in a high-rise building where the pandemic will be more dangerous. In Morocco now, whoever has a piece of land in the rural area is more lucky than one who is locked in an apartment. So there will be a mindset change for people who are saying, I am a city person, that I'm civilized. I think civilized and uncivilized will not be dealt with as an infrastructure to be shared physically, because now virtually you can get to anything home. Of course, John mentioned the question of the rural area. Let me assure you, John, that in the middle of poor rural areas, they are all connected through their phones. I think what the government should do, what the government should do in the democratic way, I'm not talking about the Morocco, they are doing great effort everywhere in Africa, everywhere. I think it's just like the sewer for the city. So therefore, the Wi-Fi for every community, every family, and I think this is not distancing. I think it's the opposite. Look, now, people, they were in the remote areas. They've never seen others. Now they see them over screens. They see everything. So please, we need ourselves to change our mindsets. We should not think that we are superior and others, they are poor in the middle of nowhere. I think they are more resilient than we are. Their immune system proved itself in this pandemic. So therefore, one, I think this question of resilience and territory. Number two, we were thinking about compactness. I think compactness was one of the values of sustainability now is questioned. I think it's not about compactness. It's about creating more space within the city, and it should be planned with more distancing than before. And by the way, social distancing doesn't mean you're making people far from each other. If you have two people next to each other every day, you make them distant for 1 year and they become closer. The other thing, actually, community patterns. I insist on that. Community patterns and human establishments. I think the human establishment needs to learn from this pandemic in order to create its own order, but not the city planner's order. Though I am a planner, I am an architect, I love aesthetics, but I think we need to move to that communities and how they would shape their future. The other thing, please forget about designers, computers, projecting augmented realities of boxes in their computers and being famous for the box. I think now the challenge how to add culture to the new planning. I would insist on this word culture. Whatever change we do, the populations are very smart to adapt and adopt solutions, but what new culture would happen after the post-pandemic? Thank you.
Very good. Well, as you know, Hassan, in my talk in Casablanca, I had a phrase that said, the middle of nowhere is no more.
Exactly.
And so I think, again, what we're pointing toward here is a recovery of the rural order, a recovery of the rural value. And what I think that could do, at least conceptually, is to bring some balance back to the world's communities. So we'll see how that one plays out. And I think that's a very good way to end this conversation. Gentlemen, Shyam and Hassan and John, I hope we can come back and do this again, because I've really enjoyed this conversation and it's been terrific. And I appreciate the work you do and the time you spent to share these really, really intriguing ideas. with the communities around the world today. So thank you very much. Many thanks again to ICF Canada for their support. To learn more about ICF Canada, you can visit ICF-Canada.com. For more information on My Livable City, Shyam's publication, which I highly recommend, and which, John, I think you contribute to, go to mylivablecity.com. And Shyam, I think I have that right. The No Place But Home series is produced by ICF as a service to its network of intelligent communities around the world. A shout out to our series producer, Mr. Matt Owen, who's down in Florida today producing this. Please join us next week for another conversation. To view prior conversations like this and to read my blog about my life in New York during the COVID crisis, go to intelligentcommunity.org/COVID-19 and follow us on Twitter at New Communities and Facebook. I'm Lou Zacharilla with John Jung, reminding you that there really is no place like home. Take care.